Today we're going to talk about pests. I've got a couple examples to show you. This one, found in the tent during the daytime. Lucky, because you wouldn't want this one to be in your sleeping bag at night time. This one we have under a rock. Being a forensic YouTube specialist, we know where to look for these things under rocks. Ooh,
Admiral Des, I am going to phone Russia about this terrible Ukraine war.
So it's time to go out and look for pests. Classic Squealus maximus. The white, of course, is the high acid content in the stomach. Once it starts injured and starts to leak out, it starts to disintegrate everything, including the animal itself. Hit by a car. You can see it's probably tried to get across the road. Blind at night. The person's probably got out to try and help it. Big mistake. They go for your face and you could be in big trouble. Anyway, we'll just have a look in here, see if we can find anything of any interest to confirm our suspicions. Is that it? Yes, it is. A pair of sunglasses. Just ripped off the person's face. Not much good to them now. One of the lenses has gone missing. Classic. You just have to be careful of pests. Some of these are just killers. Spiders. They start off small, innocuous, you hardly notice them, but they're absolute killers, especially when they start digging into those radiation swamps. They get a lot larger than you'd think and then invade your house, which is what you really don't want. You see them, ants, on flowers, but then they start milling around on the ground. They fool you into thinking they're just collecting things, like food. They've got really sinister motives. They just continually breed up. Why do they keep breeding? They're breeding because they want to take over. Of course, we wake up to them. What's the government doing, you're saying to yourself? Well, they've got a program for automatic negative thoughts, which is ANT. Classic signs for stress overlay. Just staring endlessly into the oblivion. Even lying down, you can just stare at nothing. Nothing seems to worry you. You're just sort of like in a limbo. Then you find you can't sleep. I mean, that's another tragedy of this ant depression. Then, of course, you could take up smoking. But that solves nothing. That just creates more problems. You know, some people, they try and escape by hiding under the bed, looking for things, or even sucking their thumbs. But of course, you've always got the big problem. You can't face drinking water. That's just a nightmare. Endless crying. You can't just cope. As for reading books, well, give that away. I mean, you just can't read a book. You can't just concentrate. So we get the amateurs, backyard specialists. They buy these flamethrowers, the C-45 or the industrial grade military T-19. What do they think they can do? I mean, they go to these conferences. They go to like outings where people are demonstrating flamethrowers. Then they start burning a few mounds, a few ant mounds. You know, to start with, It's all very fine, bit of fun and games, but then it starts to spread. They catch some of the bush on fire. Before you know it, you've got like floaters of these like sparks that sort of drift, catching the next thing on fire. It just sort of like gets out of hand. Before you know, you've got a building that's burnt down. I mean, you throw your hands up in horror. But what can you do about it? I mean, they just go on. I mean, there's these accidents. People's heads catch on fire. I mean, that's because of these flamethrowers. They're not always particularly, some of them are dangerous. They're not qualified, and they're not government approved. It's just like backyard deals. And in the end, you've got like buildings catching on fire, and we're talking historic buildings too. There's not much left of them once they burn down. They're just like an empty shell with just like roofs missing. So what can you do about that? Not a lot. So you end up in hospital. The doctor takes an x-ray of your head just to make sure you haven't sort of like suffered any sort of trauma. Maybe you end up in surgery. Slashed open stomach, you may need like stitched up. Could be anything that happens to you. I mean, just wash out a wound maybe. But then again, it could be just as easy as bandaging your hand, or even suturing up your thumb, which has been gashed on the flamethrower, or your face when it exploded on part of one side. They've got a terrible record of these flamethrowers of exploding. But could be as easy as like a cast on a foot. You've tripped over a flamethrower. But you'll notice the doctors are getting younger, because the other ones are just worn out with stress. But these young doctors, they don't seem to be taking things that seriously. They're all more into fun and games, I think. But the ultimate price you pay is death. Of course, the cemetery is just filling up. I mean, you may be able to visit the old graves, but soon they'll just be flooded out with new graves. That's the legacy of ants. So what's the story? What's the story, Glory? What is needed is a professional military operation, dedicated men and women, fearless, committed, take no prisoner training, marching into action, knowing with a big enough group, even though they're outnumbered by millions to one, they can achieve success. And we have such a group here today, assembling, ready to take on the challenge. They can be victorious, come home with their heads held high in pride, knowing that once again they've defeated a devious enemy.
Fist bump. Fist bump. Yeah, my man. Go. Let's go.
Once tactics have been discussed, plan of action formulated, off they go for the greater good, the greater advancement of humanity, off to an unknown fate. 3 cheers for the men and women. Hip hip hooray! Hip hip hooray! Hip hip hooray!
Commander Des, I phoned the Russian embassy. What do you make of this?
Thank you for calling Soviet Embassy. No diplomats are able to answer phone, so at sound of capitalist tone, leave name, phone number, and short description of secrets you wish us to buy from you.
We don't have any secrets, or do we?